All right. So this is, sometimes we go through wild technical difficulties, even when we're, working with a brand new set here. It happens. Here we are on season 2. Really happy to be here on the Deadly Uncle podcast, a safe space for healthy conversation. We have Nelson Kaisowatum, and he's from Piapot Reserve, and it's wonderful to have him. He's done so much in the community when it comes to youth, and I just want him to, tell us how your childhood was and where you grew up.
Thank you for inviting me. It's obviously it really is an honor to be able to sort of share my story, share my journey, and hopefully be helpful and encouraging to your listeners and watchers today. So thank you again.
Hi, hi.
My childhood, yeah, my childhood very typical to your First Nations upbringing. Parents who are basically survivors, residential school survivors. Um, I reflect back on my upbringing, and more than ever, I see the value of how my parents struggled in order to raise 4 kids without an education, with the disadvantages that they had, but yet there's those typical things of being First Nations, like addictions in our household, addictions through the lifelines, uh, poor modeling, on and on. But I don't want to be that person that throws their family completely under the bus. But there were some things that we ourselves as children had to survive in terms of poverty, violence, addictions, like alcoholism, especially in our family. So, but yeah, I look back and I reflect now with much more redemptive perspective on our family, and I'm very thankful for what my parents did in order to bring us to the place that we are. We're certainly not the healthy family that I've always wanted or envied, but we're doing better than before. Uh, I'm not sure if that sums up what you're looking for, but ask away.
Nelson, you say you're from Piapot,
Yeah.
and but you spent a lot of time in the city of Regina. You were born there. What was your experience
Mhm.
like being on the reserve and being in the city? Like, how can you like give us a little bit of a feeling of what the difference was for you growing up when you were in both places?
Absolutely. There is a difference, isn't there?
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
there is a difference, and I think those who grew up on the reserve, uh, maybe not so much with this generation, but maybe with our generation, those who were born in the 60s and the 70s, the transition from reserve life to city life is tremendously difficult, which I think a lot of our parents and siblings and aunts and uncles did not realize the change that was going to be happening to them when they decided to move. It's like moving country to country. You want that better opportunity. You want that better education. You want the advantages of city life. But it was hard. But for me, I was only 4 years old when my parents decided to permanently move to the urban city dwellings, and most of my experience, therefore, is in the city. But we were close enough to Piepot, to go back regularly to the powwows, to the cultural experience that I've come to tremendously cherish and value. Thank God, thank God, thank God that we were close enough to culture, especially with being First Nations, where you know, of course, I don't want to get into some hate speech against the government, but their goal was to kill the Indian in us. Well,
Hmm.
the Indian wasn't killed in me, thank God. I was close enough to my culture to be able to practice what was needful in order to give me a sense of values, sense of community, and a sense of who I am as a person. But that's a really long answer to a simple question. But most of my experience was in the city, and
Yeah.
God bless those people that had to make such a difficult transition from reserve life to city life.
And we're when we talk about the residential school, like in my family, my brother Sean, as you know,
Yeah.
He when he experienced his time in there, he said, by the time that he went to the school, it was actually the children that were quite abusing each other. It was passed on from the staff to our parents, and then from the parents, to the children, and the children were kind of the ones abusing each other. And it kind of just shows you the different cycles of the residential school. And like you said, the transition of moving to a city and trying to find a better life. And as for
Yeah.
you, how did you keep your how did you keep your what you prayed and what you believed in close to your heart? And how did you go about that?
I think my mom was a tremendous influencer in my life. I would like to sort of understand a little bit more about the role of women in First Nations culture. My experience and my observation, at least in my own family line, is women tend to be the primary influencer, unfortunately, and also fortunately. The men in our lives, unhealthy, unhealthy. I don't really know what that means, but I thank God for my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God for mom. And she modeled faith. She modeled. Uh, yeah, I think about God bless both of them. They're passed on now, but she modeled such humility and holding on. You know, Part of my story is, my father passed away when I was just turned 12 in 1983. But he began to withdraw from our life easily when I was like 6, and he had this long, awful struggle with cancer. But to see my mom work through that, back then in 1979, 1980, all the way to 1983, there was no such thing as palliative care. The pain management was not like it is today for those who are dealing with cancer. But to see my mom take care of my father as well as trying to raise 4 kids, it was incredible to see her model all these wonderful, wonderful values. So I think it really comes down to, what did I do? I'm not sure if I did anything, but I know my mom did. She modeled humility and service and sacrifice like nothing I've ever seen. So there's beautiful, beautiful values. I think with First Nations people, especially with the humility, gosh, I want to be more humble if I could possibly, you know.
Our female matriarchs definitely are
Yes.
strong in our communities, and I have my own
Hmm.
kokum to thank for making me strong in my identity and making me feel,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
though being light skinned, making me feel that this is my culture, this is where I'm from, and this is who I am. Now I got a kind of a, I guess it's kind of a selfish question. Now, we were both born in Regina, and
Yeah.
Regina has been known for being like basically, an urban jungle for Indigenous people, very, plagued with violence and
Yeah.
addiction and that kind of thing. And when I was very young, my dad made a conscious decision to move us out of Regina. Now, he didn't want me to grow up in that
Okay.
city because of those things. So I want to know, like, in your experience, what was that like for you? Like, was it as bad as maybe media portrayed it in the 90s and that kind of thing? Because we've all heard stories about like moccasin flats and things like that. And as somebody that grew up in the city at that time, I'd like to hear your insight into that, because my life could have went the other way. I could have grew up in Regina as well, and it's not
Sure.
that I want to know what I was missing or anything, but I just know that my path could have went that way, right?
Well, for us, here's what's very interesting. You could grow up in family violence or neighborhood violence. It's really, really hard if you have to grow up in both. We didn't grow up in neighborhood violence. Um, I didn't feel threatened by my neighbors, by my community in North Regina. Uh, we weren't in the hood, as they call it. Um, but you know what? Still, the damage was there. To grow up in family violence,
Yeah.
it was awful. just absolutely awful. And Kurt mentioned sort of the cycles that repeat themselves, the poor modeling. It was absolutely terrifying to see violence. Now, to be sure, I haven't got the worst story out there by any means. Violence, if it happens once, it could be very, very devastating. But God bless those people that have to deal with it on the daily.
Yeah.
That must be horrible. But family violence is really, really quite painful to one's emotional development. Friends, I never felt safe. Never. I did not know what safety meant. And sure enough, what I'd always do is I'd always go to our neighbor's house, because it felt safe there. They had food there. They had cable television, all kinds of things. Who knew that crossing the street to a neighbor's would be like crossing into a different country, And so, I mean, my heart aches for those people who are caught up in a cycle of violence that happens on the daily, the weekly, the monthly. For us, it happened two or three or four. I could count on both hands. It wasn't that frequent, thank God, but it certainly did do a lot of emotional damage and a lot of emotional stuntness, is what I'll call. When it comes to our emotional development as men, as people, you never get beyond the last crisis that you faced. And so it's so important. If I'm sorry if I'm jumping and changing topics, but it's so
No,
important, friends, that you face your demons. It's so important to face those crises and call it as it is, and be brave and get the helps that are available. The helps that are available to us today to face, our addictions and demons way better than our parents. So yeah, there's opportunity out there to grow. So I hope as you're listening that you'll consider doing those things that'll bring you to a better place, and especially for our children.
Myself, I'm very honest on the show. I've talked about my addictions with alcohol and drugs and stuff like that. Did you experience any of that? And then also, what did you do to help yourself cope with some of those traumatic things that you went through as a child and growing up?
Interesting thing about addictions is if it's modeled for you, you think that's normal. What a normal that is, right? When you're
Mm-hmm.
growing up. But by the grace of God, that's all I could say is my dad quit drinking when maybe I was 5 or 6. I only seen him drunk once. My mother never drank, never smoked, never. No, she did smoke cigarettes, but she never did, the hard drugs or marijuana or anything like that. So thank God for the modeling in my life again for my parents. And there goes sort of that idea of there's a redemptive side to my family, even though there's a lot of dysfunction as well, which, let's just be honest, it causes a lot of confusion, as you're growing up. What was good and what was bad? Was it all good or was it all bad? And it sort of takes a lot of time to sort of sort that out. So definitely I had my addictions for sure. And, the basic premise of addictions is you're trying to escape your emotional pain, unresolved emotional conflict. And so you're just trying to make yourself feel better. And so for me, yeah, I did have my addictions, absolutely. What was helpful was my faith in God, my faith in Jesus Christ. He's my Savior. I'm a Christian. That was a big, big deal. Separation from influences was a big deal for managing my addictions. But again, it's really, really awful and sad when you grow up and you think addiction is normal, when your parents and your aunts and your uncles, drinking is normal, doing drugs is normal, and for you to be able to separate yourself from that normal and create your own, it's terrifying, to be honest. Isn't that true? For you guys who out there had to create a new reality that you didn't even know it could possibly exist. It's terrifying. When our family was growing up, like I said, like all we seen was one addiction after another, and that was normal, and that's what you needed to be a First Nations, is to be addicted to alcohol. That's not a good thing, but I think the ultimate management, if you will, the ultimate coping. Again, going back to that same message we said maybe 4 or 5 minutes ago: face your demons, face the hurts, look at yourself in the mirror, find out the source of that pain, and stop medicating it. Because that medication, I'm telling you, you know this already if you don't know it personally, that it'll kill you. Isn't that an awful thing to consider?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that's trying to you are trying to escape, use to escape, whether it be drugs, alcohol, sex, or whatever, uh, it's going to kill you. It is going to kill you. So, I mean, here's what's really funny. Sorry, I'm just really preaching here,
No,
but here's
no,
what's
go.
really interesting. What's very, very important for us to understand is the pain of facing your demons is less than the pain of continuing in your addiction and alcohol and dependency. You'll find that as you face your demons, your emotional struggles, they're not that strong. They're not as strong as you imagine them to be. You're actually a lot stronger than you realize. And so my encouragement to you and to the listeners today, you have a lot much more strength than you realize, that you're actually you're giving away your agency to addiction when you just sort of go for the escape from pain. Amen. Sorry.
All good.
Hey.
Nelson, Kurt was mentioning
Yes, sir.
earlier that you do work in the community with youth. Now, can you explain to us a little bit
Yeah.
the kind of work that you're doing? And I want to know, is that feeling that you had as a child, of being unsafe,
Mhm.
is that what kind of drove you into working with youth to try and provide better environments for the youth in the community?
I think so. I think the general idea of our struggles and journeys is, if you face them, again, there's that same phrase, face them and overcome, that will actually point you in a direction of usefulness, if I could use that phrase, of a sense of purpose. And so my pain, as it turned out, led me to a greater purpose. And that's one of the things. I think the biggest thing in my life was watching my father die before my eyes. And the lack of palliative care, we said that already, the lack of pain management, and watching this amazing, strong man that I looked up to, my dad, die before my eyes. And so all kinds of emotional uh, struggles come from, one losing their father at such an early age. But as it turns out, what do you know? It worked for my benefit as I try to reach out to young people these days who didn't either have a father figure, had maybe their father abandoned them, maybe their father died, but I am doing my best. I'm not trying to be anybody's father, to be sure, because that's kind of weird, to be honest. Try to move in and be, what, Nelson, are you trying to be helpful to them, or are you
You
are you
can
trying to
call me
help yourself?
daddy.
Because that's just weird. Let's just face it. That's kind of screwed. Anyway, whatever. As far as I know, I'm operating out of pure motives. As far as I know, and I just want to just be that resource. Can I say it that way? That spiritual spark plug to help people and give them a sense of hope. You know what? You you have just as much potential as anybody else in this world. And if you just tackle, there's so many broken stories that I hear each week. I do mentoring, so basically, it's a counseling approach helping young adults these days, whether it be First Nations or otherwise. Like, it's just, we are growing up in a mental health crisis, our young people today.
Yeah.
Everybody is on the spectrum of depression or anxiety. And so, like I said, as it turns out, my emotional pain and setback turned out to be a setup.
You know, we talk so much about toxic masculinity, and we've both
Okay.
experienced that growing up with uncles, acting tough or being threatening, or you
Hmm.
know all those things, and just
For
just
sure.
being not being a role model, scaring you into or forcing you with fear into believing into what they want you to believe in. But can you tell me what is positive masculinity mean to you?
Good question, actually. Really, really admirable. I think vulnerability is what people have thanked me for. A sense of humility, and I think that really am I those things? And I'm
Yeah.
thankful for that. Being real with your emotions. It doesn't mean you have to be some crybaby, some sorry sack, always talking about your this and that. That can be really ridiculous too. Let's just face it. We don't want men that are sorry sack in all their life and being down, unless of course it's like a medical condition, unless you actually are depressed, and that's another conversation to be had. But I think if men can be vulnerable with what they're facing and model what that looks like of working through your pain, that's a blessing. That's a blessing. So vulnerability has been a big deal to help me and to model that for other young people today. Nobody has a perfect life. Don't assume that. It's an awful assumption. And you know what? What's worse? It's a self-punishing assumption. For you to assume that somebody has a better life than you and somehow they have some disadvantage, what's that narrative doing for you? It's making you the victim. It's making
Mm.
you not challenge the things that you're facing in a healthy way. Don't assume. Don't assume. And so somehow I'm trying to answer that question to the value of vulnerability. It's wonderful. Just be open and honest. Be open and honest, and keep that the idea that you're modeling that behavior for your kids and your grandkids, whatever. I hate intimidation. I hate it. Yet we've all been victims of it, haven't we?
Hmm.
We've
Yeah.
all been victims of bullying within our own families. You know, Other children, they get bullied from those outside our family. But us First Nations people, we've been bullied by our own family and our own siblings, our own aunties and uncles. That's horrible. That's
Yeah.
horrible.
Something to remember. And I mean, we
Yeah.
always people talk about intergenerational trauma and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We have to remember that our parents, they did the best
Yeah.
they could with the tools that they had, and that abuse does stem from residential school. And I'm not that doesn't
Right.
excuse it in any way, shape, or form, but it allows you, I think it gives you a starting point to understand it and to be able to move past it in a more positive way, and to understand the people, your
Agree.
abusers, I think, in a way, right? And I just wanted to
Hmm.
touch on something else that you were talking about earlier. You talked about when you're counseling people, giving them that sense of hope. And I think
Yeah.
that's a very important thing for our youth to be able to hold on to, is hope, because like we've interviewed a whole bunch of different types of people here, and one of our interviewees was Cree, and he was talking about when he was growing up, being able to see Nelson Bird on TV and being able to,
Oh, yeah.
say, okay, he did it, so I can do it. And that's something that we said in last year's podcast too, that it's important for our youth to see it. If they can see it, they can be it. Like if they can see our
That's
people
right.
doing positive things and being in positive things, it's going to start that wave of momentum that's going to shift and start that healing for more people that maybe need that nudge, right? And I just think it's
Yeah.
so good that you work from that point of view, that hope is essential. And it doesn't have to be a spiritual hope either. It's just hope about life in general, because we do have so many
Yeah.
people that live in trauma that maybe are hopeless at times.
Hmm.
Yeah, honestly, friends, like I'm the luckiest guy in the world to be able to, have access to young adults' lives and to hear their pain and to uh, try to create that safe place that they've never had before in order to work through, unresolved emotional conflict. And it's a blessing, and to be able to offer them hope, but not false hope.
Yeah.
I never want to offer that message of, click the light and it's going to come on, because that is absolute garbage. It is. Things take time. The best change in your life takes time.
Yeah.
So if I could just offer a sense of hope along with a sense of realistic perspective, that some of the things that you and I have to deal with, depending on your story, it's going to take time. But let me offer you this absolute standard foundation of hope. It's absolutely worth it. Absolutely worth it.
Exactly. My kokum used to say this to me all the time. She used to be like, every day, you know, there's choices put in front of you, and you have the opportunity to make the right choice or the wrong choice. But
Mm-hmm.
if you make the wrong choice, you also have the next day to make
Uh,
that right choice. So it all starts with one right choice. And then,
yes.
like I said before, it can domino into, okay, I did the right thing yesterday. Maybe I'm going to try and do the right thing again tomorrow. And then hopefully that forward momentum pushes you to start steering yourself away from the wrong choices. That's how I saw it anyways when I was younger. If I would screw up, I'd be like, okay, I screwed up, but
Yeah.
I can try and change that tomorrow. I can try and be a better person tomorrow. It doesn't always mean that if just because we screw up once doesn't mean we're going to screw up our whole life. And
You're
that's
right.
what I think people have to remember is we are human. We all make mistakes and we all make the wrong choices, but we all have the opportunity every day to make that right choice the
Mhm.
next day.
Yeah. You know what? I love that perspective. Sometimes, again, I don't want to assume anybody's story, yourselves included, but sometimes your sense of choice was never developed,
Yeah.
you know,
Hmm.
especially as a young person. If you've come from a dysfunctional home, sometimes your tendency to, to be able to understand that your choices do matter and you can make a choice. Your decisions do have value. I'll never forget when I was living here early in the 2000s in Calgary, Alberta. Uh, I'm so thankful for Calgary Board of Education who invited me to be an in-school mentor. And some of these kids, because of their grades, because of maybe their dysfunctional home, because of their attendance record, they could only be let out of class for 15 minutes. Can you believe it? What am I going to do with these kids for 15 minutes, for God's sakes? So one person, after another would come into sort of this counseling room, and I just basically, we have 15 minutes. How was your week? How are you feeling? Was there any crisis? Was there anything that you're dealing with right now? Because back then, there wasn't those resources available. But anyway, one of the student, the the student, not the student, the teacher who was in charge of that student development area, man, God bless her. She was really, really concerned about a lot of the students that were coming to see me on the weekly, and so we'd be always checking in. And one of the student, she, as they're leaving the office, was asked about an assignment. There is a point to the story. Just hang in there with me.
Oh yeah.
And she had this ridiculous list of excuses, literally ridiculous list of excuses why she could not turn her assignment in on time. I mean, it's like we ran out of paper. Dog chewed through the wire to the printer. When my mom went to get paper from the local Walmart, she ran out of gas. It's just outrageous. And she said, "How about you just come talk to me? How about you come talk to me after, okay?" And she kind of rolled her eyes and she returned her attention back to me, this teacher. I wish I could remember her name and thank her for teaching me this valuable lesson. She said, "Wow, talk about external locus of control." I said, "What is that? You've never heard of external?" "No." I said, "That sense," she said, "it's that sense of choice and decision and agency that people either have or don't have,
Hmm.
depending on their sense of role modeling and responsibility, that they have the power of choice, their choices matter. There are students in our school here that absolutely know that their choices matter and consequences do count. There are others listen to this, whose life has just happened to them. They have very, very little choice. They were abused, they were abandoned, they were ignored, or what have you, and their sense of choice isn't quite there. So they have an external locus of control. Life just happens. No matter what choice I make, it doesn't matter. And so that's a tremendous disadvantage. So there's internal locus of control where that steering wheel is in their hands. There are other people that are more like passengers of life. I'm not sure how I got here. Life just happened to me. There are other unfortunate choices that adults made in my life that got me here. And so they don't have a lot of agency of choice. And so God bless your Kokum that said, you have the power of choice. You can decide. It took me a long time, friends, to realize that my decisions matter. I thought life just happens to me and I just got to play catch with the pitches that are sent my way. Hopefully I get a good ball and I could swing. It's it's not a good way. And for those listeners out there, I just want to remind you and give you that sense of hope that your choices do matter. You matter. And I hope, like you're saying today, make those good choices because there are consequences. Consequences just don't happen to you.
Yeah.
They are directly correlated to the decisions that you're making. Make good choices.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt, eh?
That's true. That's true. And, I just want to thank you, for having you, here today as a guest. And, our families are very close. And I know that you've
Yes.
went to see my sister and my nieces, and they got a close relationship for you. So I thank you for that. And,
Mm.
and being a mentor in their lives as well. My brother, he believes he's a born again, and he believes
Yeah.
in his religion, and myself, I'm
Mm.
more of a traditional practice. I more believe in the traditional sense. It's not that I don't believe in God or any of those things, but it's
Sure.
that we just pray in a different way. And so I was at a screening for my film called They Found Us, and I picked up the flute and I
Mm.
said, my brother prays in a different way than I do. I said, but at the same time, we can sit at the same table and we can be friends, and there's no
Mhm.
barrier between us when it comes to being family or friends or even
Mhm.
spiritually connected. And so I played
Yeah.
a traditional song with my flute, and then after that, I played Amazing Grace for him and
Oh.
and his family as well. So I just wanted to know: do you believe there's room, for all belief systems, and what's your opinion on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Christian. I said that earlier. But do you know that, religion gets in the way of faith? Isn't that a weird statement? Yeah. When your religion becomes a burden to others, that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. As a matter of fact, one of the most fascinating things about Jesus is his biggest problem was with religious people. It's true. Yeah, you read that, and he had the biggest problems, the biggest arguments, the biggest debates and disagreements with those who thought they had the inside track on God. And that's what I really find offensive. Listen to me about us Christians. Oh wow. Are you talking about Christians and being a Christian at the same time? Yeah, I am. Absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, I just hate that attitude that I've got the inside track on God and I'm the expert. That is not cool. That's not cool. As a matter of fact, if I was to just give you a Bible reference, just for fun, read Matthew 20:23, when he just absolutely browbeats those religious scholars and Pharisees who thought they had the inside track on God and were experts. They say, oh man, it's awful. Here's one phrase that I'm sure will make you laugh. And he says, woe to you Pharisees and religious scholars, teachers of the law. You go halfway around the world to make a single convert. And when you do, you make him twice the son of hell as you. That's what Jesus said to religious people. He says, you don't go into God's kingdom, and your very life, the way that you live, stops others. Isn't that an absolute shame? When your religion stops people, it's garbage. It's absolute garbage. And I think out of my feverish preaching right now, I hope at the end of the day, God, please don't let me be that person that stops people from you, because I don't want to be enemies with you. I want to be friends with God and friends with people. I want to be the bridge. Lots of room at the foot of Jesus for people of all kinds of backgrounds and faiths and whatever. You know, unfortunately, the church has not had those open arms in the same way that Jesus does. I'm sorry. I hope to be amongst those that change that narrative.
That's awesome.
Woo!
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to end our episode.
Yeah,
I
no,
think.
that
You know,
Nelson, that's really insightful, and I'm not a religious person at all, but I thank you for
Thank
that
God.
perspective. Like I thank you for that perspective. I think, like Kurt says, everybody prays in their own way, and I think having that inclusive perspective on your beliefs about Christianity is really, it's really welcoming for other people, and that's what I think more religions need to do. We need to welcome people and not try to separate everybody, because we are
That's
all
right.
just human, right?
Nelson,
Yeah.
you are.
A deadly uncle.
I am a deadly uncle, actually. I love my nieces and nephews.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. You were a wonderful guest, and we, we send positive vibes out to you in your journey. And
Yeah.
what you're doing is definitely needed. And keep up the wonderful work. We need that positive masculinity in our lives, and as you said, being vulnerable. And just being kind. One elder said, it's easy to be mad, it's easy to beat up people, it's easy to do all those things. He said, try smile for a full month, no matter what happens to
Yeah.
you. That's what a real man is. So just one thing I thought I would share. But
Yeah.
hi, thank you so much for being on.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. If you guys or anybody could use my services of mentoring and counseling, I just want to underscore the idea that it's for free. It's always in public, never in private. Other people sponsor me. And so I just want to be able to assist, aid, and be a resource to those who are struggling in their emotional health, and hopefully not only help them, but model what emotional health looks like. So I thank God for that opportunity. Reach out to me anytime. Nelson Kaisowatum, you can find me on Facebook or through your Facebook, Kurt. Thanks for being an amazing friend, and really, really being that model that a lot of, both you guys, that a lot of young First Nations people really need to hear. Fantastic job on this podcast. Way to go. All the very best as well.